Is eating beef a good option if you have autoimmune conditions? Stay tuned, I'm going to answer that question for you today. Hi, I'm Dr. Arland Hill, and today I'm going to answer the question of if you should be eating beef if you have an autoimmune condition. The good thing about this answer is it's going to apply not just to autoimmune conditions, but to other chronic diseases as well. And I think it's important as we start off to make sure that we're differentiating what type of beef we're talking about. And specifically today, I'm going to be talking about grass-fed and grass-finished beef, which definitely has some unique qualities about it that is not going to always be found in conventional beef, and probably not going to be found in conventional beef most of the time. So with that being said, what are going to be some of the difference? Well, if you have an autoimmune condition, one of the things that is a byproduct of your condition is that there's going to be a lot of inflammation along with that. Whether we're talking about Hashimoto's, whether we're talking about rheumatoid arthritis, there's going to be inflammation as a part of that. And one of the things that we can use to easily combat inflammation are going to be antioxidants. Now, you'll notice that with the pasture behind me, and you can see over here over my right shoulder, there's a lot of green, there's a lot of color in the grasses back here, and that equates to antioxidants as well. And those antioxidants, they're gonna transfer into that meat as the animals eat that, and then when we consume that grass-fed, grass-finished beef, we're gonna be able to take the benefit of those antioxidants as well. Now, what are we specifically talking about here? Which antioxidants are we directly targeting here? Well, we're looking at things like vitamin A, vitamin E, glutathione, some of the glutathione precursors here. These are the kind of nutrients that we're talking about, and in a lot of situations, when we look at the literature here, these are the exact antioxidants that are talked about as benefiting those with autoimmune conditions. So that's right off the bat one thing that we can see as a benefit. Now, what else should we be thinking about? Well, again, we're only talking grass-fed, grass-finished beef here. And remember that when we're not talking about that category of beef, one of the things that those animals are subjected to are going to be hormones. Now, we know that females have a higher predisposition for having autoimmune conditions. The natural association here is that there's a hormonal component, the difference between estrogen and testosterone. And when we start talking about some of these synthetic hormones that are used in the cattle industry and conventional models, those hormones have the potential to increase risk of autoimmunity. They exacerbate the autoimmunity. The residues of those hormones that are left in the meat, they can aggravate an autoimmune condition. They amplify that inflammatory effect. So we don't want to have the risk of those being in the food and increasing that inflammatory insult. So that's two things. You have the antioxidants, you have no synthetic hormones in animals like what you see here behind me, and then also they don't have grains. Now, we know that these animals are ran on grass from the time that they're born. Their predecessors, their mothers are ran on grass, and that's all they're having access to all the way through the finishing process. They're never being exposed to grain, say for example, like finishing them on corn. Not something we do in the grass-fed, grass-finished model. Now, the reason that's important is we don't know that there's a direct correlation between that animal consuming the grain and it exacerbating autoimmunity. There's, to my knowledge, no evidence of that. But what we do know is that there is evidence of us as humans directly consuming those grains, and those grains from our consumption directly affecting the autoimmunity, potentially exacerbating it. Gluten, gliadin, those are some specific examples. We know that there are some concerns with soy there. And keep in mind that there has been some growing association that part of the reason that these may be a problem has to do with the chemicals on these foods as much as the protein in the food itself. Those chemical residues, they're still there. So we don't want to do anything that would run the risk of exposure to those. So anytime you're doing a grass-fed, grass-finished animal, you're taking the whole grain component out of the equation. Now, lastly on this are going to be, because of the way that these animals are handled, because they are constantly moving on grass all the time, we're not staying stationary with them, these animals are going to not be going back across their own manure. They're going to have a different bacterial profile in their rumen, in the gut of the animal. And what's important about that is that this conversation that I'm bringing up here with the different microbes, that transfers all the way through the processing part of this as well. We've heard stories where exposure to E. coli, a potential pathogen there, where you also have exposure to some of these organisms, another one being known as Campylobacter. These are all pathogens, and when these animals are fed and finished this way, when we process them the way we do, we don't run the risk of exposure to those potential pathogens. And these are the exact same pathogens that have been shown to exacerbate autoimmune conditions. We know that infections can potentiate autoimmunity. There are some infections that have been shown to have very close association with certain autoimmune conditions, and managing the animals this way, finishing the animals this way, helps alleviate a lot of that concern altogether. So when you look at, should you consume beef if you have an autoimmune condition? In short, I'm gonna say yes, but be very specific in what type of beef you're choosing. Don't just choose any beef. We want grass-fed, grass-finished beef, and we wanna make sure of how those animals are being handled, right? We want the color out in the pasture. We want all the green like you see here behind me, all that color out in the pastures. We want to make sure that those antioxidants are there. We want to make sure that those animals aren't being exposed to synthetic hormones. We don't want grains as a part of their diet, and we want to make sure that they're not being processed in a way that's increasing our risk to the pathogen. So it does matter where the beef comes from. Now, I will tell you as a closing thought on this, that as good as the beef can be when it's produced correctly and sourced correctly, it's just generally not a good idea to consume the same foods all the time. That, whether we're talking about an autoimmune condition, whether we're talking about another chronic disease, that has the increased risk of setting us up for some type of sensitivity and maybe even an allergy with those foods being consumed all the time. So the more that we can diversify the diet, the more plants we can get in the diet in general, the better off that we are. So with that, guys, listen, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. I hope you found this information helpful. I'm gonna be bringing you more information like this. In the meantime, I'm gonna take a line down for these guys, get them on some new fresh grass here. They look like they're pretty anxious to get moved. Make sure that if you like the information, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone, and if you wanna see more information like this, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Love to share this type of information with you. Again, thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Arland Hill out at Harvest Hills Ranch.